Something happened on the moon in 1969 that NASA scientists refused to explain on camera. One of the world's leading seismologists stood in front of a live television audience and said, and I'm quoting directly, "The result is so strange that I would rather not try to interpret it." That's a NASA scientist on live TV saying he has no explanation. And that moment, that's where this video ends. But to understand why it matters, why it should terrify you and fascinate you at the same time, we need to go back to the beginning. Before we do, quick question. Where are you watching this right now? Drop your country in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how far this reaches. Now, let's talk about what they're not telling you. Every space agency on Earth, NASA, ESA, China's CNSA, India's ISRO, is racing back to the moon right now. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, moving faster than they have since the Cold War. And the official reason is resources and research. But here's the thing about that explanation. It doesn't add up. We've had the technology to return to the moon for decades. We've had the funding. We've had the motivation. And for 50 years, nothing. No boots on the ground, no permanent missions, just silence. Then, suddenly, in the last 5 years, every major power on Earth pivots at the same time and decides the moon is the most important destination in the solar system. All of them, simultaneously. That's not a coincidence. That's a reaction. The question is, a reaction to what? Let's start with what we actually know, and I mean know. Verified, published, peer-reviewed data that most people have never heard of. The moon is the wrong size. Not slightly wrong, dramatically, statistically, impossibly wrong. Our moon is the largest moon relative to its planet in the entire solar system, with one exception, and that exception is debated by scientists constantly. Earth is only 81 times heavier than its own moon. Compare that to Mars, which is 60 million times heavier than its largest moon, Phobos. 60 million versus 81. That's not a rounding error. That's a completely different category of object. Some planetary scientists have suggested we stop calling Earth a planet with a moon and start calling it a double planet system, because that's what it actually is. But the size isn't even the strangest part. The moon is also extraordinarily light for what it's made of. Earth's average density is 5.5 grams per cubic centimeter. The moon's is only 3.3. They're supposed to have formed from the same material in the same region of the solar system. The difference in density is so significant that in 1962, NASA scientist Gordon MacDonald published a paper stating, and again I'm quoting directly from the published record, that astronomical data suggests the moon's interior is more hollow than solid. A NASA scientist published saying the moon might be hollow. That paper didn't make headlines. It didn't lead to investigations. It got quietly filed away, and MacDonald moved on to other projects. But the data didn't go anywhere. Here's where it gets harder to dismiss. In 2024, China's Chang'e 6 mission brought back the first ever samples from the far side of the moon. The far side, the hemisphere that permanently faces away from Earth, the side no human has ever seen with their own eyes from the surface. When scientists analyzed those samples, they found a magnetic anomaly that broke every existing model. The moon's magnetic field collapsed 3.1 billion years ago as its core cooled. That part was expected. But then, 300 million years later, it came back, stronger, for no reason that any current model can explain. On Earth, magnetic fields change gradually over millions of years. The idea that a planetary body's magnetic field simply switches off and then restarts, that has no geological precedent. The scientists who published the findings didn't speculate. They just presented the data and said, "We don't know why." That paper came out quietly. No press conferences, no headlines. Now add this. When the Apollo missions analyzed lunar soil, they found something that shouldn't exist anywhere except inside an aerospace manufacturing facility. Titanium, chromium, zirconium, in concentrations that require extreme industrial processing to produce. These are the metals we use to build spacecraft, heat shields, structural components designed to survive re-entry in deep vacuum. They were sitting in the dirt on the surface of the moon. And then there are the craters. This one detail is rarely talked about in documentaries, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Lunar craters, regardless of the size of the impacting object, are all roughly the same depth. Small meteorites, massive asteroids, it doesn't matter. The craters flatten out at a consistent level, as if something beneath the surface is stopping them from going deeper. Geologists call this anomalous shallowness. They don't have an agreed explanation for why it happens. The most common theory is that there's a layer of significantly harder material starting at a certain depth. What that material is, nobody has confirmed. And underneath those craters, on the visible side of the moon, not the far side, there are what scientists call mascons, mass concentrations. Enormous, dense structures buried below the surface that create gravitational anomalies strong enough to pull orbiting satellites off course. They were discovered in 1968 when early lunar satellites started behaving strangely, accelerating and deviating from their calculated paths as they passed over certain regions. Scientists traced the cause back to these subsurface masses. Nobody has drilled down to one, nobody has retrieved a sample from one. We know they're there because of what they do to everything around them. But what they actually are, that remains officially classified as not fully understood. Now, let's go back to 1969 and the moment that started this video.
November 20th, 1969. The crew of Apollo 12 has finished their moonwalk. Before leaving the lunar surface, they detach the ascent module, the upper half of the landing craft, and deliberately crash it back onto the moon. This was planned. There was a seismometer on the surface left by the astronauts designed to measure exactly what happened next. The module hit the surface with a calculated, known force, and the moon rang like a bell. Not metaphorically. That's the exact phrase used by the scientists monitoring the data. The seismic waves didn't spread and fade the way they do on Earth after an earthquake. They built, they amplified, they reached maximum intensity 8 minutes after impact, and then slowly, gradually faded over the next 55 minutes. On Earth, seismic waves dissipate in minutes because the planet is dense and complex, full of liquid layers and shifting materials that absorb energy. What the Apollo 12 seismometer recorded was the behavior of a large, rigid, hollow structure. And that's when Dr. Maurice Ewing, director of one of the world's leading seismology institutes, appeared on the evening news and said those words, "The result is so strange that I would rather not try to interpret it." Apollo 13 repeated the experiment with a larger impact. The moon vibrated for over 3 hours. Seismic waves penetrated 40 kilometers into the surface. The official explanation today is that the moon has an unusually dry, rigid crust that conducts seismic energy more efficiently than expected. And that explanation might be correct. Science doesn't claim certainty. But here's what science also doesn't claim certainty about. Why every space agency on Earth suddenly needs to be on the moon right now. Why the far side, the hemisphere we've never properly studied, is the specific target of the next generation of missions. Why a 2025 reanalysis of Grail mission data found that the moon deforms under Earth's gravity in ways that don't match any existing geological model. The moon is not the dead, simple rock we were taught it was. It is an asymmetric, anomalously light, magnetically unpredictable, seismically bizarre object that sits at a precise distance from Earth, a distance so exact that it produces a perfect solar eclipse visible only during the narrow window of human civilization. That last part, the eclipse, think about it one more time. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun. It is 400 times closer to Earth than the sun. The result is a perfect visual match. 2 disks, identical in apparent size, overlapping without error. The moon is currently drifting away from Earth at 3.8 centimeters per year. In the deep past, it was too close. The disk was too large. In the far future, it will be too far. The disk will be too small. Right now, in this moment, in the era of the only known intelligent observers in the solar system, it's perfect. Maybe that's coincidence. Or maybe the moon has been waiting for someone to notice, and now, finally, we're paying attention. If this made you think, share it with someone who should hear it, and drop in the comments, do you think we're getting the full story about the moon, or is the most important discovery still waiting to be made?